All right, welcome everyone to this special Wednesday TIA live stream. My name is Jonathan Baker. I'm the VP of Education and Member Resources. We're glad you could join us today. We have Sal Marino and Keith Lewis here with us from CargoNet. They're going to be jumping into CargoNet or cargo theft numbers, what to believe, what to question, how brokers should use the data. As we do every time we run a live stream, there's a little bit of housekeeping we have to run through. So I'll start with our antitrust statement. Discussion, comments, and presentations during TIA functions must not, 1, refer to any past, present, or future rates, prices, or anything related thereto. 2, include any reference to marketing strategies. 3, including the discussion of boycotts of any person, product, or firm, or inhibit any member's employees from discussing employment with other member company. Additionally, things you hear during the meeting that are confidential and private to TIA should not be shared publicly without its prior consent or used against or in competition with TIA. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we start. If you're watching on LinkedIn, you can submit your questions using the comments box below the stream. We'll collect all of those and we'll get to the Q&A towards the end with Sal and Keith. If you're watching this on YouTube, same idea. Drop your questions into the chat. We'll see those come in. We'll collect them and get to all of those at the end of the live stream. But before we dive in, we want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, DAT Freight and Analytics, for making this live stream possible. I'm going to run a quick commercial for them right now.
Freight isn't static. It's dynamic. It evolves. Today, freight brokers have more on the line, and they need to act faster than ever before. Rates move, capacity shifts, and customer expectations never slow down. That's why, for decades, brokers have trusted DAT. Now, we're evolving to serve you better. We've brought together innovative companies and brilliant minds obsessed with solving broker problems. And we've accelerated how quickly ideas become products, all to create a one-stop shop for trusted capacity, automation, and real-time insights. That means the largest, most secure carrier network in freight. It means full visibility to give your customers peace of mind. It means simplified execution to keep pace with a fast-moving industry, and real-time market insights to anticipate changes before they happen. DAT Freight and Analytics. We take the uncertainty out of freight.
All right, let's get into it. We're, like I said, joined by Sal and Keith from CargoNet. Sal, Keith, I'll let you guys take it from here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you again to the TIA for having us, and for everyone on the call, allowing us to share your lunch time with us. And I think, real quick, I'd like to just give a quick overview of Verisk. Verisk is a multi-billion-dollar organization, publicly traded on NASDAQ. We have 50 companies, 300 products, and we've been fighting insurance fraud for over 57 years. So CargoNet is not new to the industry, and I'm optimistic today will be time well spent. I grew up in the trucking industry. I worked on the trucking docks at Jersey City as a kid, and I spent many years selling all types of freight. So been with CargoNet for the last 16 years. Keith Lewis, my colleague, Vice President of Operations at CargoNet. I'll leave it to him to give just a quick one-sentence description on his background.
One sentence. Thank you, Sal. Keith Lewis, thanks for having us. I spent close to 20 years in third-party logistics supply chain, working for large public warehouse third-party logistics companies. I spent a few years working for a freight broker. Then I went in and decided to become a police officer. I spent a good number of years as a police officer, detective, and then as a special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And obviously, with my transportation background, I gravitated toward supply chain theft. And I retired from law enforcement in 2011 and joined CargoNet. Yep.
And we've been together ever since. What a sprint it has been. But today we hope to cover the cargo theft and fraud numbers. And not only the statistics, we do have some stats to share with you and trends. We'll cover that on the second portion. But we do want to take the time to kind of talk about and highlight some of the other data sets out there that are being cited and sourced in the media. Because the way we look at it, making decisions using data to prevent risk is a solid business strategy. However, if the data is not accurate or there's not enough depth of data, then you're making or the methodology is off, then you're making decisions on inaccurate data. I don't think anybody would want their doctor to be making decisions on inaccurate blood work or something to that effect. So, big numbers, that hyperbole, that big total theft count and fraud count, that's to really indicate, there's a problem, right? The precise numbers, the details in the data, that's going to drive decisions. And if you can't trust or understand the methodology, then most likely it's not a data set you want to die on the hill with. But Keith, please jump in.
So, is a statistic, coming from law enforcement and then coming to work here a lot of my experience in third-party logistics was in automotive in quality. We say, let the data decide, the great Edward Deming. So, there's a lot of data out there. And like Sal said, there's a lot of it is hyperbole. And I always, my catch-all phrase is when someone quotes a big number to me is cite your source. So there's a lot of data out there that we just don't know if it's trustable.
Thanks, Keith. So there's 5 different so-called, numbers or categories that are often getting mixed together. One is reported events, right? A reported event is exactly that. It hasn't been validated yet. Someone's saying something was stolen. There's no confirmation of that, right? Then you've got confirmed thefts. Police reports were made, insurance claims were filed. We are doing the due diligence to confirm it's an actual event. I'm right on cue. And then the loss value, that's what we hear a lot about, the loss value. What is the loss value? And CargoNet, we've been tracking this data for 17 years. And I love it when I get the question, well, how many cargo thefts don't you have? I'm like, I don't know. If I had them, I could tell you, right? So really getting our hands around that loss value, as an industry is certainly important. And then there's fraud signals, right? There was an attempt, there was a spoofed email, a lot of the things that we're unfortunately getting used to in this industry. So you have those fraud signals. And then there's the economic impact. And I'm not going to go into the full deep dive, but over a decade and a half ago, we did a self-insured ratio impact study. And unfortunately, it wasn't approved by the university. It just wasn't fully completed. So I'm not really sharing, the visual aids. But to wrap it up for you, they took a load of digital cameras, a value of $200,000. And if that load was stolen, it's not just $200,000 impact. When you look at the direct impact and the indirect impact, that below the iceberg costs, right? Reship, retack, duties, VATs, taxes all over again. It's got to be drayed again. Does it go on the rail again? Do you have to expedite it via air because now you're behind with no safety stock, empty shelves, loss of consumer, on and on and on? It becomes a 10-to-1 scenario, meaning in order to offset that $200,000 loss, you need to generate an additional $2 million in new sales revenue. So if you're looking at cargo theft and you go, oh, it's only 50,000. No, it's really 500,000 to the bottom line at the end of the day. So it's important to understand how these different categories are represented. Keith, you want to weigh in?
Sure. And then, the loss value, one of the problems we have, and I'm going to say this now versus waiting till we get to our slide at the end about loss value, is the numbers that get reported to us. A lot of times our customers don't know what the cost is. So, okay, I get that. We put in a zero and we move on. So we don't really know what the cost is. But on the side of the road, when your driver makes the police report, or your load planner makes the police report, and the police officer asks them, what's the value of this theft? And coming from law enforcement, I would say, okay, you don't know. So we put $1 in the report, and that's how it goes. And that's how it's reported up to the FBI. So the data, getting correct data, even if you're just giving a ballpark of the theft to law enforcement and to us, that's better than nothing at all. If we know it's a load of laptops, computers, and the last load you wrote a claim for was this, it's important that we get that data, and it's more important that law enforcement gets that. So the command staff looks at these reports and say, oh, we really don't have a cargo theft problem because only $1 was stolen.
Yeah, good points. Yep, thanks, Keith. So there's a number you might all have seen. 605,728 fraudulent email attempts blocked in Q3. This is not telling us where the problem is. It's telling us there's a size of a problem, right? And although it can be useful, we don't find it very actionable. So you look at these numbers, what are you going to do? Stop what you're doing and resolve it. What are you going to do to rectify it looking at these numbers? There's not a whole lot, right? But it is good as a benchmark to understand growth, dips, etc. But at the end of the day, it's not really, as it says there, the size of the net being a cast. It's not the number of fish stolen. So just understanding the different citations of data and sources out there, I think, is very important. For example, I'm sorry, Keith, any thoughts on this slide about the 605,000 fraudulent email attempts being blocked?
Sure, that's 605 attempts. So every one of these you have to look at is a criminal attempt to commit a crime. Even though you walked into the bank and handed them a note and said, give me your money, and they don't give it to you and you get scared and you walk away, you still tried to rob the bank. It still carries the same penalty. So if you look at all these attempts, each one of those is a felony crime. So we've got a significant problem. Like Sal said, it doesn't really tell you anything, but it tells you that to me, it tells me that 600,000+ of crimes that just occurred.
Agreed. So we've seen some of the research papers from Atria. I think actually when you look at a lot of the different numbers that are being thrown out there, because here's the thing, Keith and I, we kind of came up with the CargoNet product early on. We were brought on, and we've seen the data and the numbers just go from a couple of $1 million to a couple of billion. Then it quickly went to 15 billion, then 30, then 50. The last one I heard was $60 billion problem. There's no data behind those numbers. These are people that are making things up to create hyperbole, scare tactics. It helps sell product, right? It helps keep them front and center of the market. But there's no benefit for exaggerating on numbers. It doesn't help anyone. In fact, it really takes away from the companies that are really putting the time and effort and investment in to get the real data, to track the facts. It's not just here's a theft. That there's a lot of that going on. Here's this many thefts, but what's behind that one theft? I'll get into it later, But, for example, like CargoNet, we have over 170 data fields for an event. Now, obviously, we're not completing 100% of that. We're probably not even getting 50% of that file. But 10% of that file is way more, than what's out there. So the data, the devil's in the detail. And when you look at this ATRI number, honestly, I feel like it's probably the closest number out there. I'm not sure I believe in the methodology on how they modeled it with their mathematical equations, because it's a small sampling. Like basically they surveyed a certain amount of folks, right? And that's like, I don't know, that's like going to a classroom in one school and asking how many cookies the kids eat in a week, and then taking that number and saying it represents every classroom in America, right? But when you look at the CargoNet number of, I think it was about 770 million, and you look at that 10-to-1 ratio that we discussed earlier, that below the iceberg cost, you're kind of around that 7-8 billion mark. So although they may not have gotten there with a method we feel is the most valid, they actually became the closest, in our opinion, my opinion, to almost anyone putting numbers out there. Keith, you want to jump in?
Sure, Sal. I did not, for the record, I did not eat any cookies last week. Just so everybody knows, no cookies for me. I'm watching my diet. We were one of the sources for Atria. I worked with Rebecca's team over there at Atria, and we provided a lot of data for them. And I would agree with Sal that 6 billion number that you see there is probably pretty accurate. And the one thing I want to mention is when you get out there and these folks get out there with the hyperbole, the scare tactics, and say it's a 50, 60 billion dollar. If we had more time, I would tell you in detail where that came from. It came from an article written in 2007. But I don't have the time to tell you the facts that came from that, from Inbound Logistics. But when you get out there and you quote these 40, 50, 30 billion, it's between the original number that people were scaring everybody with, it's between 15 and 30 billion. That's where the number started at. Well, that's a big gap between 15 and 30, and that's a big number. And, if somebody asks you to cite your source on it, or you go to the board and say, I need more money for technology for fighting this type of crime, and you can't cite a source, you lose credibility within your own organization.
Yep. We're getting closer to our stats, folks, but here, high level counts, we kind of talked about that, and then the deeper event records really explains the what, when, where, and how. Event level structure, right? Describing those specific data sets I mentioned earlier. I kind of got ahead of myself, but also this is key. And I'm not going to dig. Keith, I want you to jump in on this one. Talk about the importance of analyst enrichment with the data.
Well, the events that we take in are key. So there's the overall event we take in, a theft. But then we want to do the drill down. So big companies look at the big number. That's the big number. But when you're looking at it from the macro level, you want to talk about what the overall problem is, the big picture. But when you're getting into decision making and you're getting down in the weeds to make decisions on how you're going to do your business, you want to look at the macro level and get down and look at what exactly is being stolen, when it's stolen, how it's being stolen, and what can I do to combat this.
Yeah. And also, it even goes beyond that, where who's taking in the data, how are they analyzing it, how are they utilizing it, with analysts assigned to the data entry, and they're confirming the validity of the information as well. So why does it matter, right? Well, you don't just need to know. It's, hopefully everyone on this call would tell me that California is the top targeted state in America for theft, right? But you need to do those deeper dives. So, that tendering path, who booked it, was the carrier substituted? What about identity signals, right? What about the domains and the phone numbers and the contact changes, load profiles? Route risks. I will talk about that in a minute. Methods of operation. What are those patterns looking like? And then the recovery path, right? So, 6 quick questions to be me ask yourselves if you should be utilizing specific types of data sets and why. So, what was counted? Was it confirmed, or was it just reported? What is the geography? Where did it happen and when? What is the source of the data? Because if it's coming in, second or third hand, or it's coming directly from a victim, or it's coming from multiple parties. Like for us, I can't speak for the others, but when an event is reported to us, we're wrangling in the carrier, the broker, the shipper, right? The retailer, the distributor, whoever, to get the insurance company to get as much data on that event as possible. So it's coming from a multitude of sources, and then it's streamlined. How are they handling duplicates, incomplete values, and what decision is this number supposed to support? Okay. So just in the interest of time, and I want to get Keith into the real data, our data, trends. Before you tender it, obviously we know this already, identity verification, authority review, escalation paths. In transit, are you identifying that risk of that route based on that commodity, based on that value, origin and destination? During the pickup, right? Hard stops, pickup appointments, dock control. And then after incident, reporting for recovery support and evidence preservation. And then lastly, this is the most important, team management, training, oversight, incentive alignment, management approval. The thing is, what we see a lot of is people come to these various tools like a CargoNet or any of the others out there, and then they don't really go all in on it. Like they're coming into it saying, okay, now I did it. It's over. Like I've got the tool. You got to use them too, right? You got to use the tools. You got to use the data. Keith, did you have anything to add on this?
No. I was gonna just let you go until we got to the important stuff.
There we go.
The important stuff.
So, Keith, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I will go over the high level, and then maybe you could tell us the whys, right? So, in Q1, we saw over 767 events reported to us, and the top targeted our location types were truck stops and warehouses. The warehouses are primarily driven by fraud. These are not breaking and entry. It could be probably a low percentage of. Most of them are because we need to tie the event to a location, and the last place it was seen is at the point of pickup. This is crazy to me. Coming from a New Jersey native here, you got California is 1, no shocker. Texas is 2. New Jersey's number 3. I mean, we're about 1/10 of the size of these states. New Jersey just entered the top 3, probably for the first time in our 17 years. I may have been in the top 5 at one point, but that's kind of an interesting stat that pops out. Food and beverage, Keith will talk about the whys, and we have an estimated total loss value of $131 million in Q1. But if you use that 10-to-1 ratio, you're at that 1.3, 1.5 billion mark. So Keith, tell us a little bit about, why is it food and beverage and household goods?
Well, just first off, California is #1 theft state, but it's the #1 state for recovery. So the more you steal, the more chance you have of recoveries, right? If you have a good law enforcement team out there. So we do, these top 3 states, we have very good relationships with law enforcement. So we do have a lot of successes in those states. But food and beverage, it's the most common commodity shipped. It's low value, high risk. We don't do a lot of work on securing it because it's not a high value load being stolen. And once the items are taken off that trailer, there's 0 chance for recovery and prosecution because there's no identifiers other than a SKU number or a date code. So you can't prove that box of cereal came off of that particular trailer and was stolen. So and we can't live without food, right? We can live without electronics, we can live without the gaming systems, but we have to have food. So it's basically it's sold to the fence before it's even stolen. It moves that quick through the bad guy's supply chain.
Well, my teenagers prefer gaming over food any day, so depends on who you're asking, right? Here's a heat map. When we first started sharing our heat maps back in 2009, 2010, you would just see a very high concentration of thefts in California and a lot of the port cities, right? Target-rich environments. That makes sense. But what we didn't see is all of the activity that's occurring in the middle of the country, in Arizona, hotspots in Colorado. These are areas that, look at Arkansas and Mississippi. Keith, what are your thoughts on this heat map?
So just a few comments. Arizona's big for copper. A lot of copper stolen out there. A lot of copper is recovered. Avondale, Goodyear, that area out there. The I-40 corridor coming across, or if you're from that area, you say the 40. Coming into Lake Havasu, where I lived for 5 years. You're right over in California. You can steal it and get back to California real quick. California, when I first started doing this, the red spot looked like a basketball with the commodities, the manufacturers, shippers, and the like moving eastward into San Bernardino and Riverside County. The bad guys are following. And Sal made a good point about talking about the new spots popping up on the map. These are targeted shipments. And he mentioned earlier that the warehouse, in the old days, we used to see a lot of burglaries and roof jobs and people rappelling from the ceiling and stealing forklifts and loading up trucks. We saw a lot of that back in the mid 2000s. We don't see that anymore. It's the high value goods that are targeted through the fraud, and that's why we're seeing these spots pop up in the middle of the country in the flyover states where we never saw them before.
Yep. And then we look at the cargo thefts by quarter, and we break it out by year. So in 2024, for Q1, we saw 992 thefts. And then when you go to 2025, it slight dip, to 99. And then, of course, you've got 767 in 2026. What am I doing? Okay. So we are seeing a slight dip in cargo theft events. Now, is that indicative of being less reported or an actual dip in theft events? To be determined. But at the end of the day, what you're hearing out there in the media and in the market is that cargo theft is up. Cargo theft is up. Not according to our data. We're showing slight dips. And we'll get into more on the value in another slide because not everything is dipping. But Keith, you want to kind of talk about this?
Sure. The best thing to do is take this slide and lay it over rail theft. Rail theft isn't reported, and obviously for obvious reasons, they don't want to put their business out on the street. So they're private. Their thefts are their thefts. So, but what I'd like to look at is a comparison. We'll never see it. Is the thefts that we take in compared to rail theft. So do surface transportation thefts and fraud dip and then rail thefts increase? I don't know. And just as we had the 900, almost 1,000, the first quarter a few years ago is an anomaly. It's like going down a couple hundred is the same thing. It's just part of the flow of crime. The thing is the numbers may be going down, but the dollar values will be going up. Goods are costing, and I know we're going to slide on that, but goods are costing more. So maybe the bad guys are targeting more, stealing less, and going after more expensive goods, so they don't get caught with. If they're going to get caught for something, they want to get caught for something, high value, not a load of cereal.
Yep. So we're seeing that right here from the cargo theft total and average loss values. hovering over 230,000. This is Q1. I think in Q2 we saw it. It's a lot higher. I think it was over like 270,000 or the year to date. So cargo theft incidents type. So we've got the theft categories: fictitious pickups, burglary and thefts, fraud, other, and then robberies. As far as we can tell, cargo theft, that standard type of side of the road truck stop theft, is still the majority of the thefts that are occurring. Doesn't mean there's more attempts that are occurring. Like there's more fraud attempts occurring than there are theft attempts coming, but actual successful conversions are the standard types of theft. Probably not far off from leveling out. Keith, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're kind of in the new norm. I think it just kind of normalizes. But if you take the fraud and add that to fictitious pickup, you're still right about 50% of the overall number. And that's what we're seeing now is between 40 and 50% of the overall theft is by means of hocus pocus, the fraud, purchased MCs and those type of things, internet-based type of crimes. So, it could be, like I said earlier, it could just be the anomaly that it's down a couple hundred. And we saw this cycle over the years where, we had 1 year we took in close to 900. This is like 12, 13 years ago. Next year we took in 600. We were worried if we were going to be out of work. If, we solved the world's problem in cargo theft, but that wasn't the case. It came back. But if you look at the fraud attempts, those are attempts, that vertical there, that is attempts that they tried to get the stuff through fraud. So this tells me my glass is 3/4 full. It's not half full. It's 3/4 full. This tells me that our members and the folks that get our intelligence are using the information we put out to defend themselves against these type of activities. So these are frauds that didn't make it to the fictitious pickup bucket.
Thank you. Yep. Right on cue, fictitious pickup and fraud incidents. I know that this is kind of what really folks are focused on these days, as rightfully so. But when you look at the total value of stolen freight for Q1, showing at about, 17 million, with the average value being 91,000. What do you see here when you look at this slide, Keith?
My comments from the prior slide, I think our members are doing a much better job at preventing this. Just keep in mind, cost of goods, is going up. And when I first started in this world, the average shipment value of a stolen load was $70,000. And, it goes up every year. So, we just have to continue on with the good work we're doing to fight this type of crime and never take your eye off the ball and continue to vet everyone. I know it's impossible, but vet as many as you can.
Well said. Back to the commodity. We kind of already talked about it. We talked about food and beverage, household goods. Everyone thinks it's electronics all the time that are being stolen, and pharmaceuticals, and they are targeted for sure. But from what I've seen over the years, my opinion has been food and beverage. You're not spending a lot of money to protect a load of lettuce, but you are for a $5 million load of electronics, right? Or of pharmaceuticals. So those industries, those shippers, I feel have a more stricter requirements from their logistics service providers when hauling those types of loads. Therefore, they're not converting those thefts more than like a food, because it's easier to steal. It's, going into Fort Knox versus, Fort Lee. I don't know. I just made that up. But Keith, you have anything to add? We kind of did talk about commodities already.
Yeah, nothing really other than, the drivers, at the last line of defense is the driver, right next to the driver is the shipper, giving the driver the load. And the drivers typically, well, it's just a load of cereal products or food. Nobody's going to steal it and they leave it unattended. Um, but don't discount the fact that a lot of the food is taken by fraud too.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, we had, we'll get every once in a while somebody will call up and say, "I just realized that I've been defrauded and of whatever kind of hocus pocus the bad guy used, and I'm on the hook for 50 loads now." So, remember this stuff. It's the bad guys are good at a few things. I always say this, but one is they're good at marketing. They know what the consumer's buying. Before they steal this, they've got it sold.
Yeah, they would be a really good, solid business executives if they went legit, right? So cargo theft by state, we already kind of touched on it, but we touched on the top 3. Rounding that out, in the top 10 comes Illinois, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New York, Indiana, Tennessee, and Florida. Keith, I really don't. I'm generally curious your thoughts on this. Florida used to be like in the top 3. What's going on?
Well, the shifts in the bad guys, right? And the shift in the type of crime. So we had one type of bad guy that was based out of Hialeah, Clewiston, down there a dozen years ago, 13, 14 years ago, a couple of different crews. And that's actually where the fictitious pickup was invented by a guy named Mario Alvarez. He's long gone now. But it's a different type of criminal. So they've moved around. And Florida used to be the funnel. When something was stolen in Midwest, all we had to do was give Miami-Dade a description of the trailer. Obviously, this was a asset-based theft, not a fraudulent pickup. Give them a description of the trailer, and they would set up on it. They'd keep an eye out for it, and if they didn't find the load, at least they found the empty trailer, which is some constellation. But as over the years, a lot of things that we know that are going on in the country, things changed, right? Different groups move in and out, they change, they go to different places. And we had 2 groups that popped up in California that have perfected what Mario Alvarez started back in the late 2000s. And they have replicated it and done it better and better over and over. So Florida has kind of fallen off. Florida really was just a recovery hub. And around Orlando and those areas there, we had a lot of appliances being stolen. But, the appliance business, the folks that make the electronics, like Sal said earlier, they've, somewhat got their act together, doing some different things. And we still get some recoveries and still some successes down in Florida. But they've just kind of fallen off the map. And their task force is pretty much almost gone as well.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know that. Cargo theft by location type, not to beat a dead horse. We talked about the warehouses and the truck stops. The one that always gets me is secured yard and unsecured yard. How could it be a secured yard if there's all these thefts happening at it, Keith? There's actually more thefts at a secure yard than there are at an unsecured yard.
So that's the spin. Everybody likes deniability. Everybody likes the first thing, when Sal threw the baseball through the window when he was growing up.
Told you
Dad said, "You did. You threw a window through that. You threw a baseball through that window." Dad said, "Who did this?" And you took deniability for it. You said it was Joe down the street, whoever. And we all take deniability, right? So it's the same thing now. Is when we interview that driver after the theft, where would you park last night? Oh, it was a secured location. Well, nobody says, well, tell me about this secured location. And we just run with, I was in a secured yard. And all that is the spin on how we report it up to law enforcement. The boss, who I don't want to get fired and take responsibility for what I did, that I parked last night at the truck stop, left my truck unattended and went to the nightclub. No, we don't want to do that. So, I would say when somebody does report, I was at a secured yard, I would start doing a little drill down on that and do a Google search and make sure it's not an abandoned parking lot next to the nightclub.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at it, like our type of definition of a secured yard, there's There's a perimeter fencing, there's stadium lighting, there's on-site physical security, there's cameras, there's, that's our vision of a secured yard, not just, a fence. But everyone has their own definitions. Wrapping it up towards the end, folks. I wanted to share this with you. So we have a product called RouteScore. I'm not pitching the product to you. I'm showing you a result of the product. And our data scientists created a scoring algorithm, and it's a risk score at the lane level. So 100 is the highest risk. This lane is showing you to be a 97, and it's telling you why, right? The commodity in value. There's high cargo crime activity on this lane in the last 2 years. More importantly, in the last 90 days on this lane, there's the hot zones, and then there's the risky truck stops that is driven on theft count and activity according to our data. So there's very risky and a high risk truck stops. This is based on a load of apparel of $200,000, picking up on May 26th and delivering on the 27th. So another scenario, I like to share this. This is called Route Search. This is the prequel to the RouteScore, but I like this because it creates that visual aid of the activity along the route. You can put truck stops along the route. You can filter it by commodity. So there are, was it right here? I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of small. 1,922 thefts on this one lane from Sacramento to Phoenix in the last 2 years. Now, we can go back 17 years. There's really no need. We have enough of information right here that we can manage our risk better. And the first thing I want to know is that driver making the pickup, how many hours of service do they have left? Because if they're going to 8.5 hours, this is where your product is sleeping for the night. And I don't want that. So get me a driver that's got 8 and 9 hours. They can get past the hot zone. Or give me a driver team or a relay or a security escort or multiple tracking devices. Maybe we need to find them a secured parking spot because we have no other options. Or maybe we just go around it. Okay, so utilizing this data to make more informed decisions at the lane level and being able to demonstrate to your customers that you're analyzing their routes on their behalf. Also, in communicating that to your insurance companies, that you're taking it this far to this level. And then you're sharing this information with your shipper at the QBR and the RFP. So last slide is here. Use broad estimates to, executive summaries. Second part are using fraud signals to improve controls and use the deep dive data intelligence to make data-driven decisions on your risk. So with that, I wanted to keep it for the interest of time. Jonathan, is there something, I think you're going to take it over from here? You've got the Q&A portion?
Yeah, Sal, Keith, thanks for all that. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. So this first one, a broker gets on a sales call with a shipper and wants to explain why cargo theft is a serious risk, but then their compliance team needs to make a routing decision for a high-value load. Should they be using the same data for both conversations? And if not, what's the right number for each situation?
Keith?
It's a good question. The data is the data. You should be using the same data for that decision. And it's a team sport, right? You're talking to your shippers, what you're saying. The shippers, the next to the last line of defense before we get to the driver. And the shipper has a vested interest in this, and with some recent case court decisions, they're even going to have more of an interest in this going forward. I can guarantee you that. The one, just an example of the shipper being on board is a friend of mine owns a trucking company and he hauls pharmaceuticals. And along with the data that we provide, The shipper looks at the data. They're a pharmaceutical company, so they're really taking this very serious. They're not only looking at the data, the risk, but they're matching. This is kind of interesting. I never even told Sal this. I don't tell Sal much, but he'll take this and put it in a sales presentation.
Yeah, this is already my idea anyway. Go ahead.
They take the lane risk of that data Sal just sold you, and they overlay it on the driver's electronic log, and they kind of map out where the driver is going to be taking a break. So if that driver doesn't have the hours to get to a safe location, then they hold the driver there until he's got hours to work to get to that safe location. So that's taking that data with practicality of real world, real life of the logbook and how many hours the driver can drive, and using that to plan out their route.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. So where we see it is being able to identify those risks in advance and make more informed decisions based on what you're seeing. But, you know, in the end, if you're demonstrating, because folks, you might have 1 or 2 thefts a year or every couple of years. The shippers are having 40, 30, 50 plus thefts a year. So it might not be that important for you, but it's important to your customers. So being able to, as Keith said, make it more of a collaboration and sharing that brain trust with your customers. But what we're seeing is some of our members are taking that route score and they're developing a carrier score for security purposes only. Okay. Not on-time delivery, not pricing, not, you know, damages, percentages, whatever. It's you have 10 requirements, 5 requirements of your providers, your carriers, your drivers, right? From a security perspective. And if I only meet 2 of your 10, well, they're scoring them. So maybe arbitrarily, I just scored a 20. Keith, he meets 9 of your 10. He scored a 90. Should I be hauling that load that's scoring a 99, or should Keith? So they're matching up their best carriers from a security perspective with their highest risk. Sorry. Is there anything else, Jim?
Yeah, I've got a couple more here. So a broker rep sees a contact change request come in on an active load, so different phone number, different dispatch, whatever it may be. CargoNet is flagging thousands of these fraudulent numbers every quarter. Walk us through what that rep should actually do in the moment. Like, how should they escalate that?
Stop everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you stop, pick up the phone. Obviously, you don't want to give them the load this time. Let somebody else fail, and see what happens. But, you know, they're changing the phone number, address, and all that. You got them on a load, and we've put information out on it. That is the biggest red flag you can get, and especially if they're trying to book, especially if it's a Friday and they're trying to book more than one load, and typically they only book maybe 1 load a week with you, and they're trying to book 3 or 4. Those are the things that, you know, keep you up late at night. So find a more, even if you have to, you know, dig into your pocket and pay a little more, get a different carrier, and then put them on a new vetting type of situation. Vet them like you would a new carrier bringing on board.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you're using carrier vetting platforms, right? That's the first thing I want to know is this being run through other platforms? Because we're not carrier vetting, right? It's not what we do. We're sharing intelligence. So, for example, we have scenarios where the bad actor, right? Anyone that knows me, I call them Vin Diesel. Okay, so Vin Diesel is stealing the identity, but some of these new MOs, and everyone on this call knows it, I hope, they're buying trucking companies, right? So now you think you're doing business with someone that you've done business with for 20 years and had no issues, but they moved, they're retired, and there's somebody else that has taken that over. Well, Vin Diesel purchased that with a lot of money. So he needs his ROI. And they know that brand is going to get tarnished very quickly, that trucking company that they bought. So they're going to burn it out, and they're going to burn it out fast. That's where you're seeing 10 loads, 20 loads, 30 loads in one day. Because once the word gets out and that name is mud, that company's useless to them. So they got to get their ROI back quickly. And that's one of the most dangerous things, these types of events, where you're like, oh, I can absorb a 1 loss or 2 losses. How many on this call can absorb 50 losses in one day?
Yeah. In terms of carrier vetting, Sal, that's a good transition here. What are the specific gaps that cargo theft data is still exposing, and where are brokers thinking they're covered, but they're actually not?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Can you repeat?
No, I think the biggest vulnerability is purchased MCs right now. I don't care what kind of data anyone has, the carrier vetting platforms, us, Google searches. The one thing you cannot defend yourself against is someone that just purchased an MC the day before yesterday, and they're showing 6 trucks on FMCSA, and they're trying to pick up 11 loads from you today. That's the biggest vulnerability that nobody's data, nobody's intelligence can prevent.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree 100% on that.
Last question here. Looking at the Q1 2026 data you walked us through, heat maps, incident types, top states, what's the one trend that brokers should be actively adjusting their operations around right now heading into the back half of the year?
In a month or so, we're going to be in the Christmas rush. The old Christmas rush back in my day when I was in logistics started around October. Now it starts early in the year because people want to get that product pushed out, manufactured, get it ready to get to the shelf, get it in the e-tailers facility, so when somebody buys it, they can have it the next day. I would think we're going to probably see an uptick in the higher value goods, the smart vacuum cleaners, electronics, and those type of things as we get later into the year. Of course, what do I know? Because, copper, if you were to ask me this question if a year ago, I wouldn't have thought that the big focus now is copper. So, it's tripled in cost and it's tripled in theft. So that's a commodity that I would be looking out for, and I'd be adjusting my vetting. If I'm hauling copper, cosmetics out of the East Coast has become a really, really hot commodity right now. That's where all the manufacturers are. It's coming in from overseas. It's the finished products being shipped out of, the Jersey area, that area there. That's why New Jersey's up there now again with thefts, is because of the cosmetics. So I would look for those type of high value goods and tie that in with the Christmas season that's getting ready to start in a month or two.
Yeah, and I would say for me, it would be training and compliance, in ongoing ownership of it. So everyone ask yourselves, do you have standard operating procedures for cargo theft and fraud? Is it documented? How is it shared with your employees? How often is it shared? How often is it reviewed? Is management going in and confirming that it's been reviewed? Because to really build up the strength of the fence, education and training should be at the forefront moving into the end of the year and early next. Because everyone could say they have training, but I know when I start at jobs, the training I would get is like a new member orientation guide. It's 100 pages, and no one came back and said, "Are you reading this?" So that's my answer. Training.
Awesome. Well, great stuff, guys. Thank you for taking the time, Keith, Sal. We'll have you back, I'm sure, sometime soon. In the meantime, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with, I believe, a live stream on automation with our friends from DAT. So hopefully you guys can join us then. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Take care.